Hey everyone, my name is Brad and I vlog on the Name Investing Doc. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about what I wish I would have known when I transitioned from residency to being an attending, basically outpatient world in private practice. So follow along with me as I talk a little bit about all these tips that I wish I would have known whenever I graduated. By the way, I appreciate all the feedback from you guys and all the support. It's been really nice to see all the support and positive things that people have said to me. Definitely starting from scratch as I learn how to vlog. All right, the very first thing is that academics is a bubble. And I don't mean an investment bubble. That's not what I'm talking about. What I mean by a bubble is that a lot of the individuals that I trained with when I was in residency throughout my training, a lot of those are what we call lifers. So they basically went to undergrad, they went straight to medical school, they went straight to residency, maybe fellowship, and then they started working for that university program where they were teaching. I really loved all my teachers, so I'm not necessarily trying to harp negatively on them and saying that they were bad individuals in any way. They were wonderful clinicians, are wonderful clinicians, and I really value my training. What I am trying to say is that that bubble of the academic nature, that was totally different than when I got out into the real world of medicine, and I didn't realize the stark differences of the two. Now, I did train at a very large academic center, not a community-based program, so your mileage may vary if you went to a community-based program. But I did love my advisor. However, my advisor had no experience in the real world outside of academic medicine. So although my advisor is a wonderful physician, wonderful person, when they started giving me advice on how to find jobs and how to interview, and looking back, I now realize they had zero experience doing that. So what would I have done differently? I probably would have joined some groups, I would have asked more questions online, and I probably would have reached out to more private practices to see if I could find almost a mentor, if that's even possible, on what it's like to practice medicine, since none of my family is in medicine. So I basically went in clean slate, no idea what I'm doing. All right, point number 2, you're gonna pay for a good name. I interviewed right before graduation with this very well-respected group in town of where I was graduating at. It's a very flashy group. You walk in, looks like there's almost marble floors. There's pharmacy on site. I mean, everything looks amazing when you walk in. There's also billboards up there about how they're advertising for the local sports team, and they're the providers for that certain sports team. When I went through the interview, they kept bragging about all these things. Look at how big our facilities are. Look at our name attached to that sports arena, somewhere up there for them advertising. And then came the job offer of $145,000 a year with a bunch of caveats of, well, you should be proud to work for this named organization. And if you work really, really hard, after a couple years, you can make bonuses and you might make $200,000, $250,000, $300,000 a year. I think that's when it struck me to realize that there are a lot of benefits working for a large program, higher insurance reimbursement rates, less headaches. They're basically, you just slap your name on the door and they'll provide patients for you. I couldn't help but wonder how much of my salary was going to pay for those things. And now that my brother actually owns a business and he sponsors one of these sports teams as well, they actually get box seats for those sponsorship deals. And I could imagine that administrative people in the organization, they get the benefit of those box seats. I didn't get the benefit of those box seats. I just should be proud to work for an organization that sponsors this team with probably money that I'm bringing in. The group has a wonderful reputation. They practice great medicine. But as I walked away from that interview with such a low salary offer, I think I just really realized that I'm paying for all this flashy stuff and that I probably would rather make money elsewhere and keep more of that money in my pocket rather than have very nice marble floors. All right, the next one is a little bit backwards, but for those practicing physicians, you already know this. The more desirable the city, and the less specialized you are, the more screwed you are when it comes to negotiation. I graduated internal medicine, which there's a ton of us graduating every year, even though there is a doctor shortage. And I stuck to the large cities in my current state, which means that when I went to go get my first job and I tried to negotiate with them, every single job pretty much was like, nope, it's a take it or leave it offer. This is exactly what it is. If you don't want this offer, there's 20 plus doctors in line that'll take it from you. I paid the money for someone to review my contract, and although they basically just talked to me about what it meant to me, I really would advocate for you to understand your contract. And if you have to pay a lawyer, or you have to pay something like contract diagnostics, which I'll link below, but If you have to pay them to understand your contract and where you might get screwed, or just basically what it means to you for that contract legally standpoint, great, pay someone to do it. But if you're going into a very standard contract, let's say you're taking a job with the University of Alabama and there may be no wiggle room for pediatrics, just understand that you paying those fees for someone to review your offer, it might not benefit you at all. Now, if you're an electrophysiologist or you do specialized spine or hip surgery or something like that, there's probably not as many of you out there, higher demand, and you can argue a lot more. So the more specialized you are, the less this one counts. But if you're going into generic general surgery, internal medicine, pediatrics, the bread and butter, maybe even general radiology now, you're going to have a hard time negotiating for some of these places. All right, the next one is paying down debt. This isn't one that I necessarily wish I would have known. It's one that I did do, and I'm so glad looking back that I did it. I graduated with somewhere between $100,000 and $150,000 in student loans, and I was super aggressive about paying off this debt. Looking back, I'm so glad that I did it, because if I wouldn't have done it, I wouldn't have had the freedom to say, screw this, I'm going out on my own and I'm opening my own practice. If I would have had $300,000 basically out there in student debt, I don't think I would have felt as good as saying, let me take a huge financial risk by opening up my own practice. I really think that if you want independence and you don't want to be a slave to a certain practice, if you're not 100% happy there, you got to pay down that bad debt, including like student loans or other things that are hanging over your head. Now, in my last post, I did talk about how there can be such a good thing as good debt. But if you're early on in your career, you have no money saved up, you have very little to your name, and you have a lot of student loans, you're very pigeonholed into what you can do unless you're willing to take a huge financial risk by taking out a very large loan and opening up your own practice, which is tough to do. All right, the next one is don't buy a house right away. Home ownership can be wonderful. Yes, there's ups and downs to the market. And right now, the market is absolutely nuts anywhere you go. If I would have bought a house right when I graduated, I would have thought I made a great, deal because I worked with that group. But that didn't work out long. I left that job within 2 years. And most people leave their first job within 2 years. So if I would have bought that house, I would have bought in the complete opposite end of town, which with traffic would have taken me probably about an hour each way to drive to my current location. Yes, with property market and appreciation, I probably still would have made money off of it, but it would have been more of a headache, and I would have built roots in a certain area that would have limited me on who I would have worked for. Thinking back to if I wouldn't have paid it off my student loans, if I would have had a house, honestly, I would have taken a very much lower paying job to stay in that area, and I would have screwed myself financially by doing that. So I think having the freedom of that very first job, being able to move, not having the debt over my head, it set me up for the success today. A segues into the next one, which is build assets. I continue to try to add on assets, whether it's the financial assets of the building that I'm currently practicing out of, it's the asset of building a business and a thriving practice, or it's assets like now we just have a rental home. So we're building that asset that's starting to cash flow positive, which I'll talk about a little bit more. I wish I would have looked a little bit sooner at building assets, but I was limited by paying down debt. So I think that I would have benefited a little bit more by focusing on what kind of assets can I add to my portfolio beyond my 401k, and how is my roadmap for the future going to look in terms of building those assets. I should have had a plan going in rather than just let me stockpile as much money as possible. All right, and the last one is spend some cash. I was very frugal. Yes, there's a lot of people that say live like a resident, but I was extremely frugal when I graduated, to the point where we didn't even have a couch for a couple of months in one of my apartments whenever I first moved to the current city that I'm in. I had a cardboard box as a bedstand because I was just so aggressive at paying down debt. You got to live a little bit. We spent so much time on delayed gratification that this is one of the bigger mistakes that I made, is basically being way too cheap. It's not even frugal at this point. I was being way too cheap, and you got to live life a little bit and spend it. If that means, joining a boat club, which yes, is probably not a great financial investment, but for your well-being, if that's your one splurge and it fits into your budget, join the darn boat club. Have fun. All right, you guys, I'll keep trying to post videos every Monday morning. I hope you all have a nice week ahead. Let me know if you have any future topics that you wanted me to talk about, and see you later.